Remember when I said that each map in World War II Zombies would be its own character piece, and the Darkest Shore was about Drostan. It would be in a way similar to Black Ops 3. We saw this in the Final Reich, where that map was about Maria and her going in to rescue her brother, only to find out that her brother cannot be rescued and her coming to grips with the loss of her brother. And this map, the Darkest Shore, was going to be about Drostan. We didn't know how. We just figured this was his map because he had a history with the island. It was even referenced in the intro conversation. And well, that ended up going nowhere as we went on to complete the Easter egg. Or did it? One of the new things in the Darkest Shore that we didn't see in the Final Reich is character conversation. We had this in Black Ops 3. Our characters would find themselves in conversations throughout different points in the map, and they would just be randomly triggered. It's one of those things that most players don't even notice. You have to have certain characters next to each other at certain specific times in order for these conversations to be triggered, and then even then, you might not even be paying attention to them, whether you have just your game sound low or you're just too busy focused on whatever else is going in the game, whether it be trying not to die or trying to complete the Easter egg. Anyway, they weren't in the Final Reich, but now they're back in the Darkest Shore, and it actually provides us a lot of insight into the Darkest Shore storyline, as well as a secret that Drostan had been keeping from the crew. I want to first give a quick shout out to Talum. All of these character conversations come from him. He was the one that ripped them from the game files and then found the proper order for them. And one thing you guys need to understand, that this is very difficult to do because what you just have are folders with miscellaneous audio files, and he had to go in and listen to them and put them in a logical order so that they sound like a coherent conversation, because it's easy in game when they're just speaking, but being in game and capturing that audio is quite difficult. It is also even more difficult to just give yourself a bunch of random audio files and say, put it together like it's a puzzle. But Talum took the time to do so, and he uploaded it onto his YouTube channel. So I would love it if all of you went and checked out his channel and listened to the entirety of the conversation. What I would like to play for you guys are just segments of it, just little bits of it, Drostan kind of discussing his journey on this island previously and some of the characters' reactions. One thing to understand, that this is not the full cohesive conversation. Things have been cut and spliced together just so that I only give you guys the relevant bits to this video. If you would like to see the full conversation in its entirety and learn even more about this storyline, do go check out Talum's video. A link is in the description. Anyway, here is some of Drostan's quotes from this conversation.
Well, as I was saying earlier before it all went tits up, this island has got some history, and not the good kind of history, not the knights in shining armour. I'm talking about the darkest parts of the Dark Ages. I was here at the request of our dear doctor's boss.
Himmler? You son of a bitch! You worked for the Nazis?
Now, just hold on, mate. This was before anybody knew what Hitler and his boys were up to. I was a history professor specialising in early medieval art. Himmler offered me a pretty pot to sail out here and muck out in the tunnels. Things were tight at the time, so I took the job. I didn't know I'd be working for ghouls. I found a lot of bones, carvings from the 1st century AD from the Germanic tribe. Found some nice pottery from the era, an urn filled with scrolls, great museum pieces, some decent resale value, but not what Himmler was searching for. Yeah, well, there's more on this island than the Nazis are aware of, you see. Wasn't easy, especially the part where I pocketed my finds.
You robbed from your own dig site. You stole art. Is that what we're fighting against here?
Keep your wig on. I stole from Nazis, which is what we're doing now. And I sold the scrolls to a museum, to the common folk. Would you talk this way to Robin Hood?
You're not Robin Hood.
True. Robin Hood wouldn't have kept the prettiest scroll for himself. Wonderful illustration by our mad monk. A really twisted drawing, very Hieronymus Bosch. Pools of blood, fiery swords, the fanatical daydreams of a lonely tosspot.
What did the scroll say?
Scribbles and ravings, mostly. Diary of a loony, a mad monk. He ended up talking to rocks. Needless to say, Herr Himmler was not impressed. They wanted my perspective. We're looking for something from the Middle Ages. Something carried by one of the knights from the Crusades. And no, they never once mentioned Barbarossa or his fucking sword or bringing the dead back to life. Our dear Nazi friend wouldn't be above putting a bullet in my head and then dumping me overboard. Might even save a few quid doing so. Oh, I saw how the wind was blowing. They booked me a passage to this island, but I didn't have a ticket home. Yeah. So I put an extensive fortnight dig into the calendars and then booked my own passage out on a fishing boat that evening.
What we learned through this conversation is about Drostan's darker past with this island, the time that he was here working with and for the Nazis, specifically Himmler and the Anerba. Now, of course, we've discussed the Anerba multiple times on this channel. They were a group within the Nazis, specifically looking for the archaeological and cultural history of the Aryan race. They are a central figure within this World War II zombie storyline. However, they almost take a backseat and are more in the greater picture. They are the people who employ Dr. Straub, and they are the one who are, in a sense, funding his operations. Now, this is something that Rudeau actually knew about, and he told Drostan to keep this secret from the rest of his group, which is kind of interesting. The reason they wanted to know more about this is because they believed Drostan could have more insight, and this insight would be useful for them as they try to complete their job and their mission on this island. But if Drostan keeps this secret, how is he able to do so? So it is kind of interesting that Drostan told him, or Rudeau told him, to keep this secret from the rest of his group, and it finally comes out in these conversations as they're stranded on the island. One thing to note is that Drostan, despite having worked for the Nazis, is not a Nazi, and nor is he evil. I mean, he explicitly states how he was actually stealing from the Nazis and selling some of the scrolls that he found while working with them. It's also important to note that this was pre-war, so people understood that Hitler was a problem, but they didn't understand how much of a problem he is, and all of the atrocities that he would go on to commit. Much of this didn't reach the greater public until after the war. Drostan was also quite tight on money at the time, and to him, this was a job that could provide him financial stability, so he took it. That's why he was working with the Nazis. It wasn't because he is a Nazi or because he was evil and now he's had a change of heart. It was just purely because he needed money and he didn't realize how evil the Nazis were. So while working on the island with the Nazis, they wanted Drostan to find something related to the Crusades, some sort of artifact. There was no explicit reference of Barbarossa, and the reason I think this is because they didn't quite know they were looking for artifacts from Barbarossa. I believe Barbarossa doesn't really enter their radar until Klaus discovers part of the hilt of Barbarossa's sword within Middelburg. I think that's when they start to focus their sights on Barbarossa. They knew, though, that there were some artifacts from the Crusades that could be of value to them. And what it turns out to be is the pommel from Barbarossa's sword, and that's probably what they were looking for on this island, but Drostan was never able to find it. He did, though, find many different scrolls, and they weren't very happy with these scrolls. It wasn't what they wanted, and the Nazis were going to kill him, or at least this is what Drostan believed. They had booked him a ticket into the island, but not a ticket out, which would suggest that once they're done with him, they're just going to get rid of him. He ends up escaping with some of the scrolls. He keeps some for himself, others he sells to museums in Copenhagen, and he makes out with a very interesting scroll. It has a bunch of scribbles from a mad monk. He describes the scroll as very Hieronymus Bosch, which is a reference to a 16th century Dutch artist, and he's well known for a lot of his biblical as well as religious paintings. For example, we have Visions of the Hereafter, which include 4 different paintings: The Fall of the Damned, Hell, Terrestrial Paradise, and Ascent of the Blessed. These paintings don't actually relate to our story, but they can give you a sense of the art style and how gruesome it could be. He mentions tons of pools of blood, fiery swords, almost a scene of damnation, kind of quite similar to what we see on the island as well as in the ritual room, I could assume. And he describes this person as very loony, very mad, just a bunch of scribbles, almost in a sense incoherent, of little value, and that's kind of what he garnered from this scroll. And it's interesting because as we go on in the Easter egg, we end up getting riddles from the head of a monk, and maybe these riddles were actually what was on Drostan's scroll, but he just didn't really put 2 and 2 together to solve those riddles, and we ended up doing so. He also mentions talking to rocks, which could be a reference to the 4 or the 3 suns that we find in the map. The 3 suns really are just different stones that we place into the door, and maybe those stones could actually talk to us if we listen to them, and that might be what he's referring to when he says a madman talking to rocks. That, to me, seems the most likely explanation, but there could be more, and I'd actually really love to know what you guys think about this. What is your opinion on this scroll that Drostan had found? This very Hieronymus Bosch scroll that's very gruesome and describes a mad monk and his beliefs and him talking to rocks. It's definitely interesting. It could just directly relate to our Easter egg, or it could relate to something greater on the map that we've yet to really explore and dive into, or potentially be something that we experience later on in World War II Zombies in future maps. I'd love to know what you guys have to say about this. Anyway, this was Drostan's dark past. This is why he is not a fan of this island and why he complains about it on the trip over with the crew in the intro cinematic. He's not proud of the fact that he worked with Nazis, and he wanted to keep this secret from the group, but unfortunately, after a lot of pestering and everybody else sharing their darker sides, he reveals his. That's going to wrap things up for this video. If you enjoyed it or found it interesting, maybe give it a like, possibly subscribe for more. I'm always covering the World War II zombie storyline, so if you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy the next one. I'm going to go. Have a wonderful day, and bye.